This is the first video of quite an infrequent series I'm going to put together on the Vive Emperor series. In this one I'm going to be looking at infantry. Now most of the examples I'm going to give you is from the Four Spanish Battles game, but I will use some from the earlier games in the system that were published by Pratson, the latest versions by Pratson and Legion games. There are only cosmetic differences, the basic gameplay is exactly the same. Infantry formations in Vive Emperor are at regiment scale. And of course there's some exceptions to this. Very small formations may be merged together and sometimes they're incorporated into larger units. The Anglo armies of this period were based on brigades, and these are usually represented by two counters, such as here. We can see these two counters, 1254A, 1264A, show they're part of the same unit. We'll just move that up a bit so you can see. These two counters must attempt to remain adjacent to each other throughout a battle, and when they are separated by events they can't control, they're required to attempt to become adjacent at the earliest opportunity. However, let's examine a French unit for now. So this unit in front of us is the 26th Line Infantry from the 8th Division around 1813. The unit has a number 187, which when checked on the unit roster shows its name and its parent formation. Here's the unit roster from 1813 for this particular battle, and we can go down and we look at 187. We can see it's the 26th Line Regiment from the 8th Division, part of Clausel's command. The dark blue top and light blue bottom show that this is a French unit. And the colour of the line between the two blocks, in this case this white line here, shows its parent division. In this case the white shows they're part of 8th Division. So all 8th Division units will have that white stripe there. The shading on the information bar to the left here, in this case light tan, indicates the corps or army the unit belongs to. In this case, this is shaded tan, it's part of Clausel's command. So all Clausel's command will have this light tan. And within there are a couple of divisions. This one belongs to the 8th. The long line of infantry figures at the top show that the unit is currently in line formation. And in such a formation it has two front hexes in which it may move and fire into, two flank hexes, and two rear hexes. When the counter is flipped, it shows usually that it's in a column formation, although this side is also used for general order, which a unit will adopt in towns and in woods, and it's also used when the unit is routed or disorganised. In this case we're showing that it is in a column formation, and as such it has three front hexes, 1, 2, 3. However, only this hex it directly faces it may move or fire into, but fire taken from these two front facing hexes does not have the penalties such as from a flank or a rear. Two flank hexes and a rear hex. It's all pretty self-explanatory. The first value we'll look at is the white number inside the black box. This number represents the number of steps a unit has. In this case we can say it has 4 steps. For infantry, each step represents approximately 300 men. So you can see that the 26th Line Infantry here have approximately 1200 men. When the unit takes losses, these are represented by placing a numerical marker underneath the counter as such. So it's lost 2 steps here. You place a 2 underneath here, and you can see it's now lost half its strength, only about 600 men available for fighting. Also, you can mark on the unit roster. I tend to use both methods. You can use one or the other. So if we look down here, we see that 187th is here, and we can mark these off to the right here. This blue number represents that when 4's been crossed off, 3's been crossed off, and this one's showing it's lost half its strength, therefore its morale is going to drop by 1. Let's go back to our unit here. Now an infantry unit taking step losses, such as this case here, taking 2 step losses, doesn't mean that 600 men have been killed. It's an approximation of men killed, incapacitated, men taking the injuries back to the rear, stragglers, losing contact, and some cohesion within the unit. While talking about steps, also like to point out that each hex can contain up to 10 steps of infantry. So in this case, it's got 4 steps. Another 6 steps of infantry could be included there. And obviously, if the unit had taken casualties, there would only be 2. So it's taken 2 step losses. It only counts as 2 and another 8. Go back to the British we looked at the beginning of the game, of this video. We can see that the first part of this brigade had 5 steps, and so did the second part. So in fact, these 2 units could occupy a single hex. The white number in the red box is the unit's fire value. This is used when the unit undertakes fire into an adjacent front-facing hex. So in this case, in line, it could attack the 2 front-facing hexes here. If I flip it over so it's in column, although like I pointed out before, it has 3 front-facing hexes, it's only the one directly in front it may fire into. Another thing to note, that a unit's fire value does not decrease regardless of the number of step losses taken. This is because the number of muskets that could be brought to bear in a volley is less than usually a single step of 300 men. The value on the unit's line formation is generally higher than its column formations. We can see in here we've got firepower 3. When in column, it has a firepower of 1, as you would expect. And the fire values reflect really a unit's training rather than equipment as such. A value of 3 being the most common in a line formation. You see a lot of these 3s. Some units, certain British units, might have 4, which we've seen in these previous units here, again due to their drill and the way they fired. And some poorly trained units, such as maybe some Spanish units, might have 2, or in some very unusual, very rare cases, might even only have a 1, such as this guy here. And we can see here we have a large unit because it's got 6 steps, but it's only got firepower of 1. The red number is a unit's melee value. This represents the capacity of a unit to fight at close range, which is mainly firing, but there will be some actual melee in there, although melee was relatively rare. The melee value is the same on both sides, which can initially confuse some people coming to the game. So here it's got a value of 2. If I flip it to its column formation, it always had a value of 2. The benefit of being in a column formation is you add 1 to this value, so that becomes 3. In melee combat, a unit's melee value, in this case 2 on this line formation, is multiplied by the number of steps it currently has, in this case 4. So in the case of this 26th line infantry with a melee strength of 2 times 4, it has a melee strength of 8. If it's in column, again I'm showing this with no losses, losses would affect this, it is 3, because we had 1 to this value times 4, it has a melee value of 12. This might not seem a huge advantage, but a melee value can be modified. For example, when attacking into a village or a town, there is a -2 modifier to this value. So attacking a town in a line formation would actually give it a melee value of 0. So it would have to be in column to have any effect, in which case it would have a melee value of, would add 1 to this, the 3, take the 2 away, so we'd have 4. Of course, you could stay in line and fire into the village, and what you probably want to do is a combination of fire and melee. The green number here is the all-important morale value of a unit. This is the lifeblood of the game and will ultimately determine whether your army will be victorious. The 26th has a morale value of 8, which indicates it's a confident and well-trained unit. When it has to take a morale check, it will need to roll an 8 or less on two 6-sided dice to succeed. However, this morale can be modified by many factors, which we'll look at a little bit later. Finally, the black number here on the right is the unit's movement factors. And of course, infantry use infantry movement factors. Flipping the counter over to its, we've got 4 on its line side. We flip it to column, we see it has a 6. All units improve their movement factors when they're in column, but some start with less movement to begin with. So for an example, if we look at this Again, taking this case of this early war, or not early war, this Spanish unit here, it's not very well trained. We can see comparing them, though this is a bigger unit because there's 5 steps in it. Firepower is less. Melee is the same. The all-important morale is 1 less. And we can see the movement factors are greater for the French than the Spanish. And if we flip them over, we can see this trend continued. Okay. Again, the firepower is similar. Okay. Melee is similar. So, you know, if you can get this unit into combat, numbers will count to some extent. We've got the number of steps, we've got the morale, and we have the movement here, where the French unit is still a faster moving. Movement of infantry in Vive l'Empereur is common to many other sort of games. You've got the movement factors here. We have a terrain effects chart, which tells you the cost of moving through different terrain, well, depending if infantry, cavalry, or artillery. Not really much to dwell on there. It's as you would expect in most of these games. A couple of things that you do need to note is the formation. So when in line, it actually costs a movement point to change direction. Okay, to change, sorry, not direction, orientation. So in this case, if you want to move forward and it wants to change 60-degree facing, it's going to cost a movement point. So it's got 4, that would cost 1, 2, want to change again, 3, 4. The benefits of being in a column formation is that before or after moving into hex, you may freely change your facing by 60 degrees. So it doesn't cost any. You can see this is a lot quicker to move across the map. 1, that's a free change, move up. 2, free change. 4, 5, free change. 6. You can see I'm going to scoot across the map far quicker in column formation than I am in line formation. Of course, there's penalties such as I don't have the firepower that I would have in line formation. It gets 1 for free before or after each move. If you wanted to move a second one, it would have to spend 1 movement factor to move change an additional 60 degree. The terrain effects chart will also tell you additional information you need for moving, such as it tells us that when we move into rough terrain, which is shown here, this is rough terrain from one of the Spanish maps, is you have no free change of orientation here. So it would, even in column, it would cost 1 to change direction. So you need to check, each game has a slightly different terrain effects chart. You just need to check that out. But it's all, again, that's pretty straightforward. I don't think there's anything that's going to surprise anyone who's played games before, war games before, quite how that functions. Movement points are also used for voluntary changes of formation. I'll talk a little bit about mandatory changes of formation. So in this case, if I wanted to change from column into line, from line into column, it would cost me 1. I would take 1 away from the value that's remaining here, so I'd have 5 remaining. Okay, if I move, so I've changed from 1, I move to next hex for 2, and I want to change back into the line formation, which would cost me 3. You take the 3 away from the 4 here, I still have 1 more movement. If when you change, you have nothing left here, you're in deficit, you just cannot move any further during that turn. They're all free changes. Okay, so before we go looking at some examples of firing and the morale and such like with infantry, I just want to spend a bit more time going over the formations. These, along with the morale, are the heart of the game, and making sure your unit's in the correct formation at the right time will really help your success on the battlefield. So we know that we're in line formation here. We know it's going to be a little bit slower than we're in column formation. We also know that it's going to cost us a movement factor to turn 60 degrees before or after we leave our hex. Also, infantry can stack with artillery. Here's an artillery unit here. This is its unlimbered side. This is its limbered side. I'll go into more detail of this when we talk about artillery. But an infantry unit can stack with an artillery unit as long as they share at least 2 front common facing hexes. I've made that in a very odd sort of way, didn't I? So if we look at this guy's in column, effectively in column when he's limbered, he has these 3 front-facing hexes. The infantry below have these 2 front-facing hexes. They share these 2. That's legal. Okay. Also, if it was on top, unlimbered, they obviously share these 2 front-facing hexes. No problem with that at all. This, however, the infantry below have these 2 front-facing hexes. The artillery have these 2. They only share 1 hex. Okay, so this is not a legal placement. Fire range for infantry is 1 hex, so they can fire into either of those 2 hexes. And when attacking or defending through the front, they can use their full melee value. If they are defending from the flank or rear, their melee value is halved. Infantry in column. Okay, so we know it has a 3 hex front, but can only fire or move into this hex here. Again, it has a range of 1 hex to fire into, so basically you're firing at adjacent units. Forward movement is through this front hex only, although these count as front hexes. They're only for calculating your melee if you're attacked by an enemy. Before or after moving, you can freely change 60 degrees. Whoops, 60 degrees when you wish to. Okay, a few exceptions. You can't do that when you're in the rough. Again, that's on the terrain effects chart. Most important thing that you have to remember, because lots of questions I see asked about this, is that the melee value there too gets increased by 1. So a melee value of 3 for this particular unit. It's reduced, melee value is reduced by half when defending from its flank or rear, as we can see there. And it can stack with artillery again, limbered or unlimbered, provided they have at least 2 common front hexes again. So here, legal, because they're both sharing these 2 front hexes here. And however, this is quite a bizarre thing to do. I don't know why you'd ever have units like that. That would not be, because they only share 1 common hex. Okay, and the same if it was limbered. Okay, in this case, they share these 2. That's legal. Of course, going in the same direction is legal. This, however, is not, because they only share in this single hex here. When an infantry unit enters a town or village hex, it immediately changes to general order. Okay, and this is represented by flipping it to its column formation. If it's in column already, you just move it in, because you know in this terrain this is general order. Okay, this is a mandatory formation change. You don't pay for it, it just sort of happens automatically. So that's like fortified location, village, towns, brush, forest hex. Unless you're on a road, you've got a bit of choice there, we might talk about that later. Now it has no flank or rear, so now all its 6 adjacent hexes are all front facing hexes. Its fire value is always 1. We can see that because that's the fire value when you're on the reverse side of the line formation. You use the printed melee value for attack and defence. So it's 2, it doesn't get increased by 1, because remember it's not in column, it's now in general order. I use most of these rule explanations I'm going to give you, I use the nearly all the advanced rules. In this case, they get +2 morale for being in a town or village, makes them quite tough to remove. And if they're in a fortified location, they get a +3 morale benefit. And they can stack with limbered artillery in a town or forest hex. Okay, now artillery can't unlimber in a town, so it can only be limbered, and again it would need to share 2 hexes, but in this case all its front facing hexes, so it could be, this could be actually any orientation at all, and that would be fine for general order. Disorganised infantry do not adopt general order. Okay, you can always identify a disorganised unit. If this unit was in fact disorganised, it would have a numerical value on the top of it across, and I'll explain this in a moment, and this shows you the turn in which it became disorganised. So this unit got disorganised on turn 2. That's important to know, because only 2 turns later can you begin to try and regain your order. So on turn 3, he's going to remain disorganised. You can tell the difference. Though we use the same side of the counter, it's going to be very clear which are disorganised and which are in general order. And if this unit was routed, which I'll talk about in a bit, it would have 2 counters on the top. Okay, and that shows its routed status. Okay, slight feline interlude in the video here. I don't know what she was up to. What are you after, Fleabee? Oh, but you've just caught a mouse, haven't you? You're coming to tell me that. She's catching lots of mice at the moment. There she is, commanding the battlefield. Okay, so let's have a look at infantry forming square. So forming square can only happen in clear or difficult terrain, so it's quite okay for it to form square here in this difficult terrain. Brush is classed as difficult terrain in this particular module. It costs 1 movement point to change into formation, to change into square, and you show that by placing the unit into a line formation, even if it's in column, and add in this little counter at the back to show that it is in a square.